Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Fox D Network. I'm so glad you guys are here. I'm your host, Heath Douglas. I'm here on this Monday today, and we have a very special guest with us from the world of authorship and books, and that is Miss Paula Jean Fiore, or as she goes by in the real world, Miss Jessica Smith. Jessica, thank you so much for stopping by on the show today and basically being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you. And by the way, folks, we have got a lot of questions. There's a lot to talk about. And I got to be the first to admit, Jessica has quite the inspirational story, which we're definitely going to go over and have her tell here in a little bit, because we're going to get into her life as an author, her coaching, a lot of the services she offers, and just kind of really everything in between. But before we get into all that, just want to highlight our sponsor, and that, of course, is today this network's coin, the Fox D Coin. Fox D Coin is a total community-driven coin with no premier and no developer's wallet that is keeping the coin held behind a wall. Fox D is 100% transparent, and it's open to everybody, making where the coin is for the people, by the people. And the unique advantage of the Fox D Coin is that it offers what we're utilizing right now, the Fox D Network. The coin gives everyone the opportunity to get seen on our network and gives your content a chance to shine, with our audience growing and with the network. So we're always accepting new guests, streamers, and contributors to the network. So if you would like to expand your brand, then you know what to do. Check us out on our website at foxdcoin.com. That is Fox, the letter D, coin.com, where you can download your own wallet, or if you want to buy some coins yourself, you can find us on Bilaxy, Crex24, BitSales, FX, and Free Exchange. All right, so Miss Smith. So I just want to clear the air about your pen name first and foremost, because honestly, what author doesn't have a pen name anymore? I've read stories where even some of the greatest, like Tom Clancy, has written under different names. So I just got to ask, what is the story behind Paula Jean? Is it Fairy? How do you pronounce that? Fairy. Okay, so like a boat. So how did you come up with that name? Was it something like some authors that get inspired by their mom's name and they take their father's name, or was it just something that you threw together like, oh, here's some Scrabble words and here's how it came?
So the name Jessica Smith is not searchable online. I like to refer to it as my witness protection name, even though it is actually my legal name.
Because how many Jessica Smiths, Mrs. Smith? I mean, there was a whole movie with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So,
right. There's a lot of us. And I wanted to be visible and searchable online. I wanted my books to be seen when I published. And fun side note, I have something called Tourette syndrome. And for years before I published, my Tourette's, I make noises and movements that I cannot control. My body just does it. But they have their own personality, and it's definitely not my personality. So I had to kind of distinguish between the two. I had a friend say, you should name them like Paula or something. And I said, okay, done. So that part was fairly easy. The rest of it was just trying to find something that was unique and visible. My grandma's birth father came from Italy. She was his only child that he ever had, and I felt a very strong connection to him. I've always wanted to go to Italy, but I didn't trust people to say Taliaferri because there's a G in there. So I took the name that he had when he went through Ellis Island. They had shortened it to Ferry.
Okay. And so it really is an homage to, I guess, great-grandfather, I guess, would it be, or great-great-grandfather? Yeah, right. Okay. Well, that's very nice, because I think that's wonderful when, a lot of authors, they do try to, give homage to a family member, because, there are authors, and I'm not discrediting people that do this, but, some of them, they might think of something like, oh, well, there's this one character in Harry Potter, or there's this character in, the Witcher series, and, I scramble with that. And nothing wrong with that, but I think that's very, very cool that you took your grandfather's name and put that towards your own.
Yeah. I mean, mostly because it was unique and visible, and that was the whole point. But yeah, for sure.
Has it ever gotten mixed up while you're doing, for example, any sort of book signings, or has anyone ever called you like, oh, Miss Ferry, can we, has there ever been instances like that, or do people actually separate, Miss Smith from Miss Ferry, essentially?
I am very open about having a pen name. It's not something that I do for the anonymity because Jessica Smith is already fairly anonymous.
Sure.
So I'm fairly open. Any podcast that I do, I talk about it fairly often. So
Right.
there's not too many. If there is confusion, it's when I've tried to say, okay, I'm doing a podcast. I want to be under my author name. Call me Paula. And they slip into Jessica. And so it's just like, whatever.
Okay. Right. Because normally sometimes authors, and I completely understand, especially more famous ones like Stephen King, is, there are times you don't want to be recognized, immediately, because there is the recognition of, again, somebody like being Mr. King. You're like, oh, the fans just come around and, excite you, and you can't get a break to yourself. Like, can I have 5 minutes to myself, please? So that's why I was wondering if you did that whole thing where you're like, no one can ever know I am Miss Smith, or you just, no, that's fine. That's cool if they know I'm Miss Fairy too, sort of thing.
I mean, that's one of the perks of being an author as opposed to like a professional musician or an actor, actress, is they're much more recognizable than the face of an author. So I already have that anonymity factor going for me as well.
Right. Although there is some truth to not being known famously, because I know, for example, there's plenty of stories where, for example, like Dolly Parton had entered a Dolly Parton lookalike contest and got third. There was even, oh yeah, yes, there's plenty of stories. There's even, I'm trying to think of his name. I'm losing a blank here. The famous actor from the 20s, the mustache guy. He's the bowler hat. He's
Charlie Chaplin?
Yeah, Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin even entered a Charlie Chaplin contest and got dead last. So that's what I'm saying, is not everybody, even being famous, there's people all the time that it's like, nope, they were never known. Like, so now I also want to touch on something very personal. You did mention in your About Me section, which, by the way, we'll add the link to your websites in the description. So we'll have it if anybody wants to check out your Facebook and all that sort of stuff. But you came out with a barn burner of a story, stating that you have Tourette's syndrome. And now, again, I don't want to get too personal, but do you mind opening to the folks about your history with that, kind of what it's like? Since I understand with Tourette's, not everybody has the same Tourette's. Like, everyone's different with Asperger's, everyone's different with, schizophrenia. Do you mind telling us how you deal with it? How'd you get it? The story of it, kind of really the backdrop of all that.
So I do have a fairly unique story, just because statistically speaking, Tourette syndrome will start to develop between the ages of 4 and 6. Mm-hmm. I didn't start making noises until I was 17 years old.
Wow.
And so I wasn't diagnosed until I was 24. So
they would have never known early on, for example, that there was a tic or something.
No. I mean, I was a weird kid, and Tourette's can technically be considered on the autism spectrum, depending on the doctor you talk to. But my signs were all so subtle that it wasn't until I started doing a real deep dive for my own curiosity's sake and understanding what it is that I'm like, oh, okay, I can see how that would have been on the spectrum. But for the most part, I was a fairly normal kid.
Right.
Just a little bit of an oddball.
I mean, that's the real question, right?
Right.
Who's not a rambunctious 4-year-old?
Right. I mean, it was very different for me because I didn't have, a lot of people with Tourette's are told, stop doing that, stop being so disruptive. You're such a bad kid. And I didn't have that. So I've got a completely different mentality when it comes to my Tourette syndrome. For years, I just thought I had a chronic case of the hiccups until they started to evolve and change, and the noises started, speaking words, and then it got weird. But for the first year, 2, maybe even 3, I just thought it was a hiccup. And so I see them as a normal bodily function, just like you sneeze or you cough. Sure. I mean, I have about the same amount of control over it. Yeah, you might be able to hold back a cough.
Right.
But then you're going to cough up a lung, and when you hold back a tick,
for sure,
it becomes tic attacks. I mean, it's so similar in a lot of ways, and it's just a bodily function. My body's just more active, I guess. I don't know how.
And that's fine. Well, and you were talking about, not being diagnosed early because, and by the way, I myself have been diagnosed with like Asperger's and autism myself, and but I was on kind of the very low end of the spectrum, and it was the same thing where when you're 4 or 5 years old, and this is what I learned from when I got diagnosed from my family psychologist, is it's kind of hard to really diagnose a 4-year-old child, a 5-year-old child, because let's face it, what 4-year-old child is not hyperactive on sugar? I mean, every kid at 4 years old has ADD, so it gets to that point where once you start getting to 16, 17, okay, there's definitely signs and issues. So with that is when you were growing up, even with the certain things that now looking back retrospectively, were there things that even you yourself were going like, man, this is not how a 10-year-old kid acts. This is not how a 12-year-old girl should be. Like, was there things like that, or was it just kind of more or less under the radar? Like, what was it kind of growing up with it now that you look back retrospectively?
Looking back, I think I had more signs of OCD than I did with the Tourette's or any other aspect. I remember trying to walk to school, and if the ball of my right foot stepped on a crack, I had to step on a crack with the ball of my left foot in the exact same place without changing my gait. So I couldn't take a longer step or a shorter step. And it made me kind of crazy, but my parents were like, well, just stop doing it. And so I kind of forced myself not to, and it was subtle enough that I kind of could try not to think about it, but at the same time I was aware of it. There were a couple of things like that looking back I went, oh, I see. So I wasn't just being a weird kid like that. That is an OCD thing, but I just thought it was my parents were just like, well, that's kind of weird, but okay. They were very supportive. They were very, they weren't mean in any way. I had a very supportive family, and I was very lucky in that regard too. Like, okay, you're a little weird, but you know what? We love you anyways.
Oh, for sure. Now, you said you got diagnosed at 17, correct?
No, I started making noises at 17. I was diagnosed at 24.
Oh, okay. Okay. So from that time when you did start to make the noises at 17 through 24, now what was that timeline like from the time that you were like, okay, now this is definitely something beyond just a tic to, okay, now I've actually got something and I need to get diagnosed. What was that timeline like, kind of building up to the diagnosis?
It was definitely more of a concern for my parents. They had me see 3 or 4 different doctors who had no idea what was going on. For me, I mean, like I said, it's just kind of like a cough or a sneeze. It was never a big deal for me. Like, nothing hurt. I didn't see a problem. Like, I've had normal hiccups, and normal hiccups like hurt.
Oh yeah.
But these didn't hurt. So I'm like, okay, I don't care. So I make noises. But I saw 3 or 4 different doctors who had no idea. One of them said, well, something has to be spasming. There's some kind of muscle spasm. So let's give you some muscle relaxant. And I still did it anyways. One of them said, well, okay, so let me hear one of these noises you make. And I said, I can't do them on command. They're like 5 octaves above where I go typically.
Really?
Oh yeah. If Paula comes out, like, it's very high pitched. I call her my opera diva. Sometimes she'll have this really pretty vibrato in there. Sometimes she'll cat call people, but they're always like way high pitch. So you know.
Right, for sure. Well, and I wouldn't ask you to do it right now. I'm not trying to force you either. So
right. And I actually have friends who can imitate it better than I can. Speaking of, coming in dead last at a look-alike contest. I can't imitate them, but I have friends that can. So, but because I couldn't imitate it to the doctor, he's like, well, then I can't do anything about it. Bye. So I'm like, well, that's fine with me. My parents were definitely more concerned than I was. I was diagnosed. This is a long story. How long of a story?
No, it's okay. I mean, you have the floor. So whatever you feel like you want to divulge, and like I said, I don't want to get so personal that I step on something that I shouldn't, sort of thing. So if you want to tell us all of it, go for it. If you want to tell as little as you want, that's totally fine as well.
When I was in college, I had these noises. I was undiagnosed, but there was a lot of issues with the leadership in this college major that I was in. They would point me out in class. Do you see why your noises might be a problem here? They told me they couldn't place me in an internship, which essentially meant I couldn't graduate.
Right.
So I ended up failing all of my classes that semester because
No
I
way.
can't graduate with this anyways. Like, it was a rough semester with everything else going on in my life, and I'm just like, no, done.
No.
But in order to, I had a very smart college that I loved the policies that they had in place, because if you fail all of your classes like that, you are required to see the school psychologist before you can register for the next semester of classes. And speaking with the school psychologist, telling him what happened, we pulled out the DSMV and went, it's this, 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 and this. Yeah, you've got Tourette syndrome. Cool, I officially have a diagnosis. Can I register for classes now?
No. So essentially all these professional doctors that you'd gone through, and then one college class, it just takes, this is what I have.
Yeah. I mean, he was a registered psychologist, so I mean, it was a legit diagnosis. But yeah, he pulled out the DSMV because I had people say, it's possibly Tourette syndrome. It's possibly Tourette syndrome. And I never went to see a neurologist specifically at that point, just because I knew that there was no cure for Tourette's. And so why pay a bunch of money for them to say, okay, there's no cure, and it wasn't a problem. It wasn't until it became a problem with college that I needed the diagnosis, which actually was super helpful, because then it meant that I didn't have to go to the testing center. I had my own little private room to take tests in. There were definitely benefits and perks that I was very unaware of.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, I didn't feel like I needed it.
No, and I think too, a lot of people, even in today's day and age, I think a lot of people that when they get diagnosed with, be it Tourette's, be it Asperger, be it, whatever, there is kind of that stigma that, if you say, hey, I have Asperger's, you're going to be looked at different. You'll be put at the back of the class. You won't get a job. And people need to understand.
Paula.
Yes. All right. There it is. Okay. I was about to say, I was like, I was going to ask, is that Paula coming out, or what's going on? Okay.
That was Paula.
All right. Paula Deen going to have some sugar and going to. But no, it's true. A lot of people do feel that, if they tell somebody, be it a counselor or a teacher or something, that they're going to get ousted. And it's not like, this isn't like 1890 anymore. We're going to throw you in the Winchester Insane Asylum and, you'll never see the day of light again. It's, now we have these sort of things now where, hey, we have this counseling service. Hey, we have this thing and that thing. And so now it kind of evolves into where you graduated college, which I'm assuming, like most people, you graduated all 4 years, no college debt whatsoever. It's all just
So it actually took me 6 years, and I actually got away with only $5,000 in student loans. So they're almost paid off. So I worked really hard for that.
Right. I was about to say, most people, that's like, even my brother went to college and he ended up doing the whole like Army, military cadet thing. And even though he got a bunch of scholarships and stuff, it surprised me that he was still even walking out with a couple thousand in debt, because it's like, yeah, this book isn't covered and that book's not covered. And there's this program that you got to pay for because the college book. I mean, it does. It surprises me how like even if full ride scholarships nowadays are not full rides. So. But now, so after college and everything, being diagnosed finally, this professor of, giving you the DMV is, now you've been diagnosed. What happens then? Did you see yourself internally? Let me say this. Did you see yourself internally finally being relieved? Like, okay, I'm not a crazy person now. And then also, was it something where you kind of had a newfound on life, or you're like, no, I'm just still Miss Smith. I'm just still who I am.
I don't think it really affected me much. My life is just a series of very fortunate accidents, I feel like, that I'm just like, oh, cool, this worked out well. Partially just because I have that mentality of being able to turn whatever happens to me into an advantage. That's what I talk about a lot in my books, is using my Tourette syndrome to my advantage, using my fear to my advantage. This is just what I do. But I kind of forgot about the whole internship thing after I switched majors, and it got to be my last semester, and they said, well, you can't do an internship now. You had to have at least one semester after your internship, and you only have one left. And it was too late to apply for internships. And so I said, well, guess I'm going to do a research paper instead. So I did a research paper on how Tourette syndrome affects communication, which was my major. And that's when I kind of really did that deep dive study of, okay, what is Tourette syndrome? Let's look at the history of it. Let's look at, you know, all of these different aspects of it. And that was just the coolest thing I've ever done. That was life changing. It was kind of one of those, you don't know what you don't know. But just because I started doing the research out of curiosity, I'm like, oh my gosh, who knew?
Right. It's kind of like people when they have like, you know, a rare skin condition, or when they have a rare cancer, you know, they start delving into it and they find a group and they're like, oh, I'm not the only person with this. Oh my gosh, this is, you know, not a crazy person for, you know, so that's really cool. And now what was your, you know, to tell the viewers at home, you know, what was your first book kind of, you said you inspired because of the Tourette syndrome. What was it like writing about your Tourette syndrome? And now that you have the knowledge, you have been diagnosed, what was it like going through the book? What is the name of the book? And I guess kind of where can people find it?
So my first book is actually that college research paper on how Tourette syndrome affects communication. Presenting it to my professors, they said, wow, this is actually really cool. There's nothing like this in the communications field. You need to get this published. But it's really hard to publish a college paper. As hard as it is to publish a book, it's actually easier to publish a book than a college paper.
Really?
Yes. And
now, I would think if you've done the research, you've done the info, I think it would be easy to just, okay, McGraw-Hill, I would like you to publish my research paper. Here's, you know.
What you have to do, fun fact for anyone who's curious about publishing a college paper, is you have to go to conventions and present, and then you are published if you win in this presentation.
No.
Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? Pass. I don't want to.
That kind of sounds like the American Idol or America's Got Talent version of college papers, except basically, instead of like Howie Simon and Mel B, you know, it's like Mr. Jenkins, PhD at Yale, you know, Mr. Phillips, PhD at, you know, Harvard. So
right. And I'm just like, no. Besides which, I've always been a bookworm. Like, I was the kid in 7th grade. I was grounded from books for an entire summer.
No, now that's a punishment for most other kids. Like, no PlayStation for you. You're going to read Moby Dick. You know, you're like, but I like reading Moby Dick.
Right. It was kind of it was the worst summer of my life. But I had read Harry Potter series wasn't out, but I had read a book series that was the equivalent of Harry Potter, the whole thing in 2 months, and I was technically still in school. That was in May and June.
Wow.
So my parents got a little concerned and rightfully said that was your reading list for the summer. You're done.
Would your parents be happy if you've read books? I mean, that's kind of what parents would love.
But at the same time, I loved their wisdom in seeing that I was going too far that direction. They wanted me to, you know, why don't you go out and have friends? Why don't you go out and play? Why don't you like diversify yourself a little bit? So it was actually very wise of them, and I very much appreciate it, even though I hated it.
Well, I don't want your kid to be that shut-in one that just never sees the light of day, and it's like no friends, no family, nothing. Just no, you need to see people.
And I think a lot of that is part of why I was a little higher functioning on this spectrum, is because I was kind of pushed out the door. Like, if my parents had just let me read obsessively like this, how much more would I've been on the spectrum, because I wouldn't have been able to work and study and like figure out things that I wouldn't have been able to figure out.
Absolutely.
Like I said,
I'm in the same boat. Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I completely agree with you, because my parents were the same way. Is, you know, even when I was diagnosed with Asperger, I mean, sure, parents were concerned. You know, it was the whole worry about, oh gosh, is he going to lead a normal life? But my parents never treated me like, you know, the shut-in kid, you know, and never worried about, oh gosh, he's never going to have. No, I mean, like, I worked. I mean, you know, I worked on a farm. You know, I worked when I was like 16 for my grandmother in the kitchen. You know, I mean, I mean, my parents were the same way. They were like, no, you get out, you have friends, you live in the. So my parents never treated me like, oh my gosh, he's the leper and we have to keep him away from the. You know, it's like, no, you have friends and family.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But where can people find your book if they are curious? Is there any way that like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, anything like that, or kind of
So
where can
I'm
they get your stuff?
trying to publish a book. I made a few mistakes, and it is currently only available on Amazon. I did try and get it in
Um,
Barnes and Noble, but there were mistakes made, and I learned.
no, I learned a lot.
Right. So for anyone wanting to publish a book, please do not take the free ISBN because the free
Okay.
ISBN is. I went to Barnes and Noble, and they said, "Well, but you have this ISBN. We can't put it in our store." And I went, "Oh, that's cool,
Oh,
I guess."
oh, wow. Kind of a
So
letdown, heart sank.
yeah. So I have plans to do like a massive overhaul on which will allow me to change the ISBN, but there have to be a significant amount of changes in order to do so.
Okay.
Um, so right now it's only available on Amazon and it's good, but know that it could be better and it's gonna get better.
Okay. Hey,
my
we'll have the second edition in what,
Yeah.
2022 maybe, something like that.
Ooh, I don't know.
Okay, well, let's not make promises.
Because I also have a very short attention span, and so I have like 8 different projects going at all times. And I
Oh yeah.
finish projects. I do finish them, but I have to
Right,
like
right.
rotate through them to finish
Yes.
them.
No,
So
I understand.
it might take me a while. There are plans, but there's not actual much follow through as of yet. It's called Awkwardly Strong on Amazon. Again, Paula Jean Ferry, because I'm searchable. You can search that. You can
Right.
find it anywhere. I also have 2 other books, Tragically Strong and Fearfully Strong. And again, all of these, as I expanded the first one, it kind of became how to utilize awkwardness
Mhm.
as a tool and as an advantage. And so I did
Right.
the same thing with other areas of my life. I did it with, hard things that I had experienced and healing and being able to utilize those. I did the same thing with fear. And then my next book, I've got another book coming out September 27th about all of the mistakes I made while self-publishing by myself. So it's called Hard-Earned Lessons Learned, a guide on what I wish I'd known while self-publishing. So
Clever. Very
thank you.
clever.
Thank you.
Well, and kind of rolling into the not just the publishing thing, but even as books in general. So one of the things is kind of a little bit about myself, but definitely this is for you as well. Is I personally dabbled into audiobooks for a little bit, and what I found out is that it just wasn't for me. There was a lot of stuff that just didn't work out. My voice was just not made for it. I know a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you'd be great because you have that radio voice." Well, this is what I do, interviews. I'm better at it. But my point is with everything that had kind of happened with COVID, March, April 2020, with a lot of publishers and, authors kind of shutting down and all that sort of stuff. Were you ever affected by the COVID thing? Like, was there anything in your writing that, oh, I can't get this publisher, or I wasn't able to put out this many books, or oh, I'm having struggled? Like, what was kind of your experience through the whole 2020 thing with being an author, being shut down inside, kind of, dealing with, oh, hey, publishers are closed because no one's buying books. Like, did you experience that at all, or what's kind of your side of it?
I actually saw an increase in sales because people were staying
Right.
home and were bored out of their minds and wanted something to do.
Yes, that's
I read
true.
a lot more, and the people I know read a lot more, and I feel like I sold more books, but okay. And where I'm a self-published, traditional publishing didn't affect me. I actually launched a book in July of 2020 last year. That's when I
Wow.
launched my 3rd book.
Mhm.
And I launched it in the middle, like I was in the process of moving. I just experienced some family trauma.
Mhm.
That's why I was moving, was to be home closer to my family.
Right.
So I didn't give it the time and attention that I could have for a successful launch, but it
Right.
still did fairly well. And I still get sales, like, even with not having the visibility that like my first book did. My first book
Right.
had probably the biggest visibility because it could relate so well with people that I was already connected to in the Tourette syndrome community.
Mhm.
But Fearfully Strong still did very well, and I still see sales for it. So
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad that you weren't affected by it. Because again, a lot of people, not just books, but the whole world in general, got affected by it. So I didn't know if there was something that maybe, oh, I wasn't able to sell, and because obviously with being able to get out a lot easier to bookstores, that's hey, would come to my book signing, that sort of thing. So but
Right.
2020 didn't happen. So
Which, like I said, I didn't give it the time and attention that I could have, but it still did well because people already knew me as an author. People already knew, you know, that I
sure.
was writing and putting stuff out. But it's funny because most of the world thinks COVID was this terrible, awful thing. And honestly, COVID was the best thing that could have happened for me at that time. Like I said, I utilized everything to my advantage.
Ones. You're right.
Everything is for me. Everything happens for me, not to me. That's something that one of my mentors says. And I love it and live by it. But because I'd had some family trauma. So in December of 2019, I had my younger brother was murdered. And so having that time where I didn't have to deal with people and I didn't have to put up a face, I could take that time to just kind of journey inward. I could take the time to heal, to mourn, to process, to figure out what I wanted my life to look like now that it was significantly changed. COVID was the best thing that could have happened. You know, I healed a lot faster and bounced back a lot faster than I could have otherwise.
Well, that's good. And before we go, one last thing as well, I would like to ask: are there any other books that any other series or something? Because kind of going like what we said about like with Stephen King, kind of doing the pen name thing. Is there any other novels that you have in the future that you've kind of got with your 800 million other projects? I'm going to do a sci-fi novel, and there's a romance, and there's a like what kind of future projects should people be looking out for as well? Kind of in 2021, well, what's left of 2021, it's like 2022 and onward kind of thing.
So I've made a shift in my business. I've actually started hosting writing retreats. I've got an online course about creativity and writing. People just keep asking me questions about how to do this. And so I've kind of made a pivot there. So I've done, again, the OCD kind of flared up when I started looking at creativity and inspiration and how to get past writer's block. So I actually have a book that I want to write called Creative Elements that's going to connect creativity with water, fire, earth, and air. Like this is actually a cycle, a process. Okay. The creative process is a cycle. And so I'm really excited for that one. But I've also started working on my first fiction novel, which is exciting.
Ooh.
I'm so excited.
Are you allowed to divulge anything? Let me ask this. Is there anything that would be spoiler alert? Like, don't click off now if you don't want to, like anything like that.
No spoiler alerts. I can give you just enough of a teaser.
Okay. I'm interested. Let me hear it.
Okay. I've actually told this to people before I even had a plot line outlined, and they're like, yep, I'm in. So this is based on a historical figure who actually existed. The very first woman diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. She was a woman. She was born in 1800s in France.
Okay.
She was, which first of all, 1800s France and its political upheaval has lots of stories in and of itself, right?
The fall of the crown, all that, right?
Right. She was also nobility. She was a countess who had the swearing form of Tourette's.
Oh, the one that everyone thinks of when they hear of Tourette's. Yeah.
Right. Like that alone just had the makings for a good story. Like, and there's not enough known about her life that I could really find any. We didn't actually even know her real name until 2019. 2019, they actually found her name.
Wow.
And so I've collected everything that I could. I found some she has a castle. I want to see her castle so badly.
That would kind of go hand in hand.
Right. But she was just known for years as M. Dampierre was her name. But now I have her full name, and I get to fill in the gaps of what no one knows about her life.
Oh, that is so cool.
I'm so excited.
So it is a historical. I don't want to say historical fiction in a way. Like, are you going to write it more as a historical fiction or more like a biography sort of thing?
It's going to be, I think I've done some research on this. There's actually a genre, a very small genre about biographical fiction where people will take historical figures and then, just kind of do like a spin-off of their life type of a thing. Like if this had happened type of a thing. So it's a biographical fiction technically, but it's definitely going to go more of the historical fiction route because literally there is a skeleton of her life. It took me 6 months to figure out that she never had children. I couldn't find
Wow.
records, but I couldn't confirm or deny if she'd had any. But she didn't. Found it.
Well, good. All right. Well, and I will say that's awesome because, a lot of people in the world of, fiction, especially historical fiction, is I think sometimes a lot of people don't do enough of their research. They kind of watch enough stuff on, well, listen, I saw Saving Private Ryan once. I think I know how World War II goes. And it's like, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more that happened on D-Day than just, Tom Hanks and, Vin Diesel hanging out in a church, So, but that's really awesome that you're able to kind of piece that together. And I guess that obviously won't be out next week, but, have you started on it? Where are you in the process of that? When can people probably, I guess, reasonably maybe see that come along, I guess?
And that's the hard thing, where I've got my writing retreats, where I've got my online course, where I've got like an entire other business. I'm launching my next book. I have probably 4 or 5 key scenes written.
Okay.
But they're, it's
because
not,
of like the 8 projects at once, you're like, don't quote me on this. Don't.
Right. And I'm not sure which one I want to see out next, because I told you I also have my creative elements that I want to write as well. So I don't know if creative elements will come out first, or can I tell you the title?
The
title of this.
You've already reeled me in, so you might as well hook, line, and sinker me.
It's called Madame, Madmn.
Oh, how clever! How clever!
I didn't come up with it, but I loved it.
It fits. It's French. Now, will there also be French integrated, or will this be definitely like, no, this is all English. I don't know how to speak French. This is.
So I did actually take 3 years of French in high school, and I've somewhat kept up on it. But what I want to do is I want to keep it relatively clean. I want it to be like something that younger children could read, even though she had a swearing form of Tourette's. So the swearing is going to be in French, and I am going to make it accurate because I want the accuracy, because OCD. And I'll give you enough hints as far as context for what it means without actually saying it. And there'll be a few phrases here and there, like little pet names that her mother would have called an endearing term for a child. But for the most part, it's going to be in English. So
okay, nice. Because I normally when people do, because I like reading about history and historical fiction and stuff myself. So there are times where some authors will take the road of like, well, they'll speak in German or French or Italian in their native language for these scenes, but then for the description of the house was covered in a nice, it'll be in English. So I didn't know if you were how heavy you were gonna lean into the French on certain parts, essentially.
Yeah. Not terribly heavy. At some point, ideally, like I would love it to be translated into French. That's like life goals.
That would be awesome.
Right. But as far as right now, like I want it to be just enough that you like feel like you're in the scene.
In France.
Right. Which I did write a scene, and one of my mentors, I work with Richard Paul Evans. He's got 41 New York Times bestsellers.
Wow.
And he also has Tourette syndrome. So, he was my hero for many years.
You guys meet hand in hand.
I love that I got to meet a hero of mine and love that I get to work with him. But, he obviously knows what he's doing if he's got 41 New York Times bestsellers. I read him one of my scenes, and he loved it. He didn't give me any feedback on it. He says, I felt like I was there, and I love that you put in the French without overdoing it. Like all of this was just, you introduced the characters without stopping to like list everything about them. Like, so it was very validating for me as a writer. I felt great. But
good.
That was the goal, is to have just enough that you feel like you're there.
That's awesome. Well, I definitely will, and of course, like I said, we'll definitely have all of your links to your website and everything like that, so people can definitely keep up with you and everything. But coming to a close, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. We're glad to have interviewed you, and like I said, guys, you can definitely There it
That
is
was
again.
also Paula. She was also very excited to be here.
Okay, well, thank you, Paula, for coming as well. But no, thank you so much for coming. Thank Paula for coming. Now that we have to say thank you for that. Like I said, guys, we'll definitely have all of her links to all of her websites down below. And again, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of give a shout out to any fans, friends, family before we check out here?
I mean, there's so many people that I could do that like all day long, but gratitude is like a huge core concept of mine.
Sure.
So I don't feel like that would be fair to you guys for me to do that.
It's like, do we have 3 hours? My mom, my dad, my uncle, my cousin, my nephew, like.
You're right. You know, and there's just so many people. People are great. I love people. I mean, even people that are listening here, like, you know, that's just one of my favorite things. Like, I'm really good at loving people. People are my favorite, whether I've met you or not. I saw a quote once on Facebook that said, you know, yes, I love you. I may not have met you. I don't know anything about you, but if people can hate for no reason, I can love for no reason.
Well, I think it was Gene Autry. It may have not been Gene Autry, but I remember the quote. It said, like, strangers are just friends you haven't met yet.
Yeah, I love that one. That's a great one.
Oh, man. Well, again, thanks so much for stopping by. Again, guys, thank you for stopping by. And we'll be able to rewatch this if you did miss it. So don't worry. You can always check us out on all of our various social networks. But until next time, guys, we will see you later. And again, thank you so much for stopping by.